Good afternoon, YouTube. I first wanted to talk to you again about the coronavirus, which has been affecting all of us. It's been very difficult for me to handle the situation without being very depressed and saddened by the amount of death that has happened. The quarantine in particular is extremely lonely. Simply because you're cut off from all social interaction, and it's, I guess you can't really appreciate something fully until it's taken away, because it's absolutely horrible to live like this, in such a way. I mean, it's for the protection of yourself, for others, but really it's hard on everyone. So this video, I want to address a few things that I've been hypothesizing about, and that is the idea that China has always been hiding their true nature. Pardon me. The one thing that I'm learning about the Chinese, their dishonesty seems to know no bounds. When I study their amount affected, there's no guarantee that this website is accurate, but for the most part I see that it's updated every day and so on, and for my purposes it'll have to do. So when I look at the Chinese figures, they operate like clockwork. They're overly precise, if that's the word I want to use. And in the real world, we know that nothing can be reported in that fashion. The amount of deaths or the amount infected could change by the minute, by the second. And whenever they put in these figures, it always adds up perfectly. And I find it suspicious because life is not controllable like that. So the nature of how they're reporting their statistics already, to me, is there's a discrepancy to be found there. And also the fact that the growth rate, the Chinese government is trying to fool the rest of us into thinking that there's no cause for concern, as they've been doing from the very beginning. And that's been an absolute lie, according to what we've seen everywhere else in the world where this virus has taken hold. And my conviction comes not only from that, but from the fact that these governments are probably more accurate because they're running a democracy, let's say. And it's not a dictatorship there, so there's some moral obligation for them to report the true figures, or close to the true figures, that are actually being affected and killed. There is this beautiful video I came across, China Needs to Be Held Accountable, the Calgary Sun, where this individual questions
around the world.
What's going on. So I want to play the clip for you here for a moment.
Around the world have a right to know how is China and its dictators going to be dealt with after this horrible worldwide pandemic is over. We now know that the Chinese government withheld information about COVID-19 for at least 6 weeks. By that I mean the first cases in Wuhan were discovered in early December.
Okay, that's incorrect. Just wanted to interject there. That's incorrect. The first cases were actually in November and October. So at least that's when I started hearing about it quietly, but before it was considered a threat.
Doctors who were treating these people very rapidly realized and notified their colleagues that this was a new virus. It appeared to be transmitting from person to person. The Chinese government harassed these doctors, intimidated them, told them not to send their samples out other than to official laboratories or destroy them, and didn't tell the world until December 31st that there was a pandemic going on in China. And more important, didn't say until January 20th that human-to-human transmission was happening. And that's key, because if it had just been animal-to-human transmission, you stop it by cleaning up where it began, which was a sea market and live food market in Wuhan, which is a city of 11 million people. But if it's human-to-human, all kinds of things have to happen. By the time China was being praised in January 23rd for containing the virus, it was too late. There were already millions of people infected in China, and there were already thousands who were traveling all over the world. This needs to be dealt with when this is over. China needs to be held responsible. The problem is that because of its political power, and you see it in the World Health Organization announcements, in Canadian announcements, they've been praising what China did. There would have been a virus anyway. China made it worse. More people are dying. More people are being infected. And its dictators need to be held to account.
I completely agree with that statement. See, what everybody is, well, what they're hoping is that it wasn't done on purpose. What people don't seem to realize is that Xi Jinping, the president, Xiaoping, he had a lot of enemies and rivals in his own country. It's not really much talked about. And my thinking was the Communist Party designed the virus to eliminate these rivals, these enemies. Because as I've pointed out in previous videos, and I'll point out again, the difference between them, Chinese, the Communist Party, and the West, let's say, is the value of human life. In the West, we value life. In China Communist Party, the deaths of 400 million people is inconsequential. And I'm being literal about that. You might ask why I think that, and I'll tell you. Under Chairman Mao, they could have destroyed that many people, and they would never have looked back. There's an old saying that you can't accurately count the bodies that those people wrecked up because there was no accounting for it. And the same is true here. I don't know how many of you know it, but there was mass bonfires in Wuhan, and they've been cremating bodies like mad. Some say up to 50,000 per day. So it's not a situation in which I would trust the Chinese for anything. Nothing that they're telling us is true whatsoever. Nothing. There's a lot of propaganda that's been going up in Italy per se. It says here, don't blame the Chinese, are not responsible for the virus. And then Forza China. So Forza is kind of like the same as, it's like force in Italian. So it's empower China, more or less. So, and this kind of propaganda has been popping up everywhere here, even in Canada. So I'll take you back to the anniversary parade of the Chinese, which was nothing more than a silly display of pseudo-strength in their military, designed to try to make the Americans cower. In addition, it was to make the entire world more aware of the glory and power of the Chinese. So, you may remember that the Americans were hammering out a trade deal, with the Chinese. And I think Trump gave them something like an ultimatum. If you comply with the deal, you'll pay something like a third of the tariffs that you will pay if you don't accept the deal. So, which of course was highly beneficial to the Americans. I don't have the exact figures here, but it's a deal that Trump negotiated highly in favor of the Americans and highly beneficial. And if the Chinese didn't agree, they'd be paying triple, 100% of the tariff, let's say, as punishment and incentive. So then the deal went cold. The delegates went back to China and essentially cut off their interaction completely. And a few weeks after that, the virus came in. What I'm thinking is, actually it wasn't even a few weeks, it was less time than that. I think under 2 weeks. So what I'm thinking is, there was already anticipation about the virus being released into the public from the Chinese Communist Party side. And I do believe that Xi Jinping was already aware very much about the weapon and its distribution and the date. Maybe he didn't know exactly the location it would be released, whatever. But I do believe he was aware of his existence, and that it was going to be released, and that he gave the order. So, more and more when I read about China deflecting blame, reassigning blame to the Americans, they even tried to blame American Marines who were trying to help them. And not to forget that China actually sent masks to Italy and Spain, I think it was. And upon testing these so-called Chinese masks that were sent as aid, the Italians and the Spaniards eventually found out that they were only about 30%. 30%, I think, functional. So what they did is they essentially they threw them away. They didn't use them. So it was it was. Can you imagine how bad it is in Italy? And then the Chinese come in on a pretense or a pseudo facade of kindness, of extending some help, and in the meantime they give you equipment that's either sabotaged or incompetent, and they were giving that to people to try to protect themselves. It's like they want you to die. They very much want you to perish, and they will help speed along that process. So, I mean, this is just speculating, but really the more that I'm reading, the more I've come to believe that, you know, there are so many coincidences that you can't ignore them all. The fact that Wuhan is also a virology super lab, 2 of them. There's too many things that could have gone wrong. And as for the wet markets, the wet markets have existed for centuries already. The eating of bats, of snakes, of whatever happens to be there, everybody knows that that's already been around for centuries. So the fact that that the coronavirus is being blamed on that kind of wet market, I think is preposterous, because it's a perfect excuse, and it reassigns blame somewhere else, and it misdirects the person it's trying to fool. But I insist that, as reprehensible as I find the wet markets to be, I highly doubt that the coronavirus did form there. For the reason that I just outlined, because for centuries they have functioned in that manner, and there hasn't been an outbreak like this for that reason, let's say. So I'm forced to believe my original hypothesis, which was it was released into the population, either by a victim that was already infected and then released in the population, or some other means. But like, I can't imagine how they would do it apart from infecting a few individuals and then releasing them into the public. So I'll conclude my video with that. I certainly find this virus to be very, very the human race hasn't faced something like this in centuries, I think, or maybe a century, before the First World War, maybe. And I'm thinking that we should take it very, very... We should not underestimate this particular thing. This is something that's... Who knows how many of us could be killed at the end of this year. Coronavirus started coming among us, I guess you could say, in the media sometime around December. But I was already reading about it in November and October, so it's like... It's been with us for a while, and there's already so many people that have been severely affected by this. Whether it's by the virus directly, or they've lost their jobs, their livelihood, whatever. So there's many categories that you could say that it's affecting our daily lives in every way. So thank you again for your attention, and have a good day. Stay safe.